Hello everybody, it's Wyvern here with another bit of Total War Warhammer 2 Quake Magic gameplay. This time around we are on the map Oakenhammer for a little bit of Dwarf versus Beastmen gameplay. So for those of you who don't know, there's been a massive, or I suppose a pretty significant meta shift ever since Mortal Empires came out with how the Beastmen play, and Cygor builds have become more and more popular because Cygor got a huge boost to its accuracy. It is now a very, very accurate artillery piece, and you will almost never go into a match where your opponent did not bring at least one Cygor. Oftentimes you'll see two, especially against Dwarves, because against Dwarves, potentially your opponent can split up their Cygors, get a nice wide setup, and then the Dwarves, who are of course very slow and their short little legs don't carry them very fast, struggle to come up and chase down the Cygor. And at all this time, they're getting pounded, and the Beastman player can simply feed in units one at a time to just try to slow them down. So I decided to kind of make a composition that will hopefully help counter this by flipping the tables on the Beastmen and going with a full Vanguard build, which is something I don't think many people expect the Dwarves to do. So for my Lord, I did decide to bring a Rune Lord on a Anvil of Doom. Now the main reason I brought the Anvil of Doom is actually specifically for the Locus of Power, which gives an additional 15% magic resistance. Obviously one of the most common spellcasters for the Beastmen, if they do not bring Malagor, is usually Lord of Death, especially against Dwarves, Fate of Buna. And of course Fate of Buna could devastate some of my high value targets, such as my Norgrimling's Ironbreaker, so I really want to mitigate that magic damage as much as I can. The only other non-vanguarding units I do have is a unit of Slayers covering a single cannon, and the cannon is really here to allow me to apply some pressure to my opponent from range. And really what I'm hoping here is that if my opponent has any sort of fast troops to try to get on top of the cannon, the Slayers will be able to fight him off and deny them the ability to really pressure the cannon. For my vanguarding force, it is a mix of miners as well as rangers and of course the Norgrimling's Ironbreakers. The front line is composed of a whole bunch of miners with blasting charges. You can see there is 5 of them here, as well as the Norgrimling's Ironbreakers. One of them is the Ikran Miners, who of course have additional satchel charges. They have 3 charges of ammo rather than the usual 1. They also do have Frenzy, which improves their melee stats by quite a significant margin on top of what they already have. Alongside that, on the flanks, we do have 2 additional units of miners with blasting charges. Unfortunately, it's just barely too slow to get 1 additional unit of miners with blasting charges in. I'm actually 400 points short in this army. I could have easily crammed in 1 more unit of miners with blasting charges, or added some veterancy points to these units. Behind that, I do have a trio of Rangers with great weapons, one of which is the Ulthar's Raiders. Really, these guys I'm hoping can debuff a specific target, and perhaps a unit of Bestigors, maybe a Gorbull or Minotaurs. Obviously, there's a whole variety of units that your opponent could bring, and I'm hoping these guys can debuff and make them an easy target. Behind that, we do have a whole bunch of 4 units of Rangers. Rangers are basically inferior to Quarrelers in almost every way, but they're a little quicker. Most importantly, of course, they can Vanguard deploy, and despite having a little less ammo than Quarrelers, I do believe 2 less shots, they can definitely melt through the vast majority of Beastmen units. For my opponent, he did decide to go a very sort of standard at this point build, I think. For his Lord, he did decide to bring Morgor Shadowgave, who of course is still powerful, although he has been limited now down to only 2 casts or 2 summons of good old Chaos Spawn. So now we can only get 2 of them. Still very, very powerful, yeah, still just a powerful unit. Alongside that, my opponent did bring a front line of Bestigors. Of course, you can see the first rocks are already flying down. Trying to clock my miners here. Poor guys are going to take actually, it's going to be a miss. It barely doesn't even hit these ranged great weapons quite, or splash them a little bit, but nothing too crazy. And so yeah, no heroes. My opponent does have 2 units of Ungor Raiders up at the front, backed by some Bestigors. Bestigors, of course, will slice and dice through miners very quickly, but my hope is that with the backing of satchel charges, and of course Norgrimling's Ironbreakers, and of course the throwing axes, I should be able to fight the Bestigors on fairly even terms. But also does have a unit of Minotaurs with shields over here, who can of course tear through most of this infantry very, very effectively. Once again though, I'm hoping that mass quantity can definitely help me here, as I do outnumber my opponent by a margin of over 2 to 1. Finally, in the back, my opponent does have some Centaurs with throwing axes, who can of course do a lot of damage to my massively unshielded force, and they also don't have the worst melee stats, so they can definitely dive in and do some damage to my Rangers on the charge and that sort of stuff. So yeah, without further ado, throwing things into high gear, you can see my cannons already teeing off on the Cygor, and shortly thereafter I will have my Rangers open fire on the Ungor Raiders, just trying to level them as quickly as possible, get them off the field, get them out of the way, so I can then continue pressuring onto my opponent. And you can see the Ungor Raiders are routing very, very quickly. They simply do not have the survivability to go toe-to-toe with all that fire coming in from the Rangers. Now my opponent is going to shift over with his other unit of Ungors, but I'm going to simply push into them. You can see there are some rocks coming in, and they're actually doing quite a bit of hurt to the poor Rangers. And you can see the Centaurs follow up on the bombardment and are immediately doing a lot of damage here. And despite losing a model, they're definitely doing a lot of hurt. You can also see the miners here are trying to satchel charge these centaurs, doing some okay damage there, but nothing too crazy. And now these centaurs are really in the chicken coop, and I'm forced to try to kind of shut them down with a mix of satchel charges as well as arrow fire. So definitely a bit of a difficult spot here with the centaurs getting into my backline. Obviously, I don't want to commit the Slayers. I did forget a little bit about Rune Lord. It's a little late on getting into the fray. Over here, you can see the Bestigors are getting satchel charges as they push in. But with the Minotaurs plowing in there, it's definitely going to be a bit of a difficult position. And of course, the Egret Miners still didn't really get off that much of their ammo. Nonetheless, we will be able to hit the Bestigors with the debuff, the good old Mark by Ulthar, which is going to debuff their armor a whole bunch, and that means that those throwing axes are absolutely going to annihilate these poor guys. You can see shortly they're going to start losing HP like crazy, because throwing axes are one of the most powerful units in the game as far as raw DPS goes, and if they don't get interrupted, which is not happening here because they are being screened by the normal rangers from the Centaurs, they will cause massive annihilation. Where you can see a good old Master Rune of Wrath and Ruin is annihilating these Centaurs with throwing axes, because my Rune Lord is finally getting to the fray and pushing straight forward. The Centaur over here is being, or the Cygor over here is being pressured. I've definitely made a massive mistake here in not engaging the Cygor in melee to time down and deny him the ability to keep throwing rocks. Organ and Ironbreakers are also basically AFK over here because I simply didn't pivot them to engage. In the meantime, you can see my opponent has gotten his 2 summons of Chaos Spawn, or I do actually just 1 unit of Chaos Spawn so far. The other is, of course, the Minotaur with shields over here, and I'm simply trying to focus down the Bestigors, whittle them down, and soften up my opponent's troops a little bit. In the meantime, the Norgorgons and Ironbreakers are shifting, trying to intercept this unit of Bestigors. You can see the good old Rune Lord is trying to intercept them as well. Just time down a little bit, buy me some time, and let the Rangers disengage. The Rangers right now are really my core unit that needs to get clear of all these Chaos Spawn and really just try to apply pressure from a different angle. Unfortunately, these Rangers with great weapons are not quite able to extricate themselves in time. They are going to get torn apart by the Minotaurs very, very promptly. Unfortunately for my opponent, though, he is definitely starting to... He has cast both of his Chaos Spawn, and they're getting wiped out pretty quickly by Ranger Fire. Of course, they're deteriorating at the same time. The cannon is still teeing off on the Cygor, but I've made a huge mistake in just not shutting it down, and it's definitely biting me in the rear here. The cannon is obviously doing quite a bit of damage, and no doubt about it. Definitely the fact that it's just not able to land those hits, not able to really, it's just not doing enough. I'm not shutting down the Cygor. It's definitely a huge problem here, and I'm definitely paying for it. Over here, though, some miners are coming back. You can see the vast majority of the miners are routing. You can see the Rangers are collapsing. So my front line at this point is just hinging on this single unit of miners, but they are holding their own. The Chaos Spawn is slowly but surely collapsing. My opponent has forgotten about this Chaos Spawn and Morgar, no doubt trying to micro his Centaurs away from my very, very angry Slayers. And that does buy me a tiny bit of respite, and these Minotaurs are now pushing into the fray, and they're going to start taking a nasty crossfire from a whole bunch of angry stunties. Over here, you can see the Norgorgons and Ironbreakers, though, are taking nasty rocks from the Cygor, which is causing me some huge hurt. Over here, they're dropping models like crazy despite their very high melee defense. But my opponent definitely getting some friendly fire here on these Bestigors. I do drop Master Rune of Wrath and Ruin once again on these Bestigors, trying to whittle them down a little bit, but these Norgorgons and Ironbreakers are very much on the verge of breaking. I do push the Ulthar's Raiders into the fray, just trying to whittle these guys down and just get a little bit of damage onto them. But fortunately for me, the Minotaurs are definitely starting to run a little low on HP. You can see some miners have gone back into the fight, and the Minotaurs are getting crossfired. They're definitely not having the best time of it, and despite their shields, once you get behind those shields, they have very low armor, so they really don't do well against crossbows. Unfortunately, once again, I'm not being good about shutting down those Cygors, and it's hurting me very, very much here. Now, these Slayers have gotten into really the back line of my opponent. You can see he's emptied all his ammo on his Centaurs, and it still hasn't really stopped these angry Slayers. This horde of angry Dwarves is still plowing through, and so my opponent does commit a Centaur trying to time down, but that's of course not going to go well for him. Slayers are very, very potent against these sorts of units specifically. I do notice that my opponent is trying to pursue the Slayers, and I turn my Slayers around and shortly dice up these Centaurs with the help of these Norgorgons and Ironbreakers, who are hot in pursuit as well. Over here, the Rune Lord is tying down the Cygor, finally engaging in melee, and you can see the Bestigor herd over here that tried to engage has been hit by Marked by Ulthar and being whittled down by the last sort of remains of my ammunition. And you can see quite a few do get picked off here and there, definitely a few model kills, and that's definitely going to set me up for this kind of final showdown. Right now the bar is very, very close. You can see I've lost the vast majority of my force, so right now it's about 50-50, definitely, perhaps even a little bit in my opponent's favor. However, my Slayers are pursuing the Ungors. You can see these Bestigors over here have been zoned away. Now the fight is definitely degenerating here in the pits. It's the Cygor against the Norgorgons and Ironbreakers, Ulthar's Raiders who have resorted to close quarters. And then, of course, Morgar against my Rune Lord. But the Rune Lord has respectable melee defense at 52. He has 120 armor, which means the poor Morgar doesn't really have much of a chance of hitting and damaging him effectively. And so he's definitely not in the best positions here to fight the Rune Lord. The Rune Lord is definitely going to be able to hold his own. Plus, of course, he does have some pretty crazy resistances. I do believe, I'm not entirely sure what his resistances are. I do believe it's like a 15% Unfortunately, it's blocking me there, but you can see 25% physical resist. So he's on top of all that armor, he's completely negating that damage. Fortunately, though, my ammo is very low. You can see I'm down to the last dregs of satchel charge ammo. You can see these Minotaurs over here. Their 3 models are pushing up, trying to get some additional damage in. And my cannons are trying to tee off on the best scores, but not having the best of times scoring any hits. You can see I do drop Wrath and Rune on him, though, and that will fairly quickly melt him down. The cannon shot over there does send a few bestigors flying. Definitely a pretty nifty shot there. And these guys are definitely routing as they collapse to that nasty, nasty rune. Over here, Morgr is tied down in close quarters. Over here, my opponent is still being pursued by very angry Slayers, who, having dealt with the Cygors, are now trying to run down the Ungors. Shortly, my opponent is going to turn around these Ungors and order them to engage the Slayers in close quarters to buy himself some time. However, over here, you can see the Minotaurs are actually being zoned away by a blob of angry melee units, including the Norgonians Ironbreakers, who will perform pretty well against them with their high melee defense. And these Minotaurs are simply going to get routed off and driven away. They get shattered fairly quickly, which really leaves my opponent down to only a handful of units. The Cygors are actually being pursued by the Ulthar's Raiders, who are actually just barely fast enough to keep up, kind of, and keep zoning it away. And that really is only leaving Morgr on the field. You can see the balance of power is definitely very much in my favor now. You can see the Slayers. Of course, Slayers are not ideal against squishy targets because they don't have any armor, and their melee defense is kind of mediocre. But they do dice through these Ungor Raiders, and surely they're going to be able to keep pursuing and chasing after that second unit. Things are definitely looking pretty good. You can see I'm able to pop another rune there, I do believe. Perhaps it's a rune for my opponent. Oh, it's Foe Seeker and Call of Violence. Trying to keep himself in the fight. But at this point, Morgr, in spite of his regen and everything, is getting just surrounded and beaten down. The Rune Lord is just so tanky, and it does end with my opponent's army simply shattering. So I do think that, in spite of everything, I do actually believe that there were definitely some mistakes I made, and some pretty significant mistakes I made, really. In regards to my composition, I was obviously unit short because I just wasn't quite decisive in my setup initially. I was not the best with my army deployment. Definitely lost my miners with blasting charges a little prematurely. In some cases, they just kind of allowed them to get run over by the bestigors. And the Minotaurs, of course, I definitely wasn't on point with my focus fire, but definitely wasn't on point with shutting down the Cygors in a timely manner. And that meant they got a massive value, especially against the Norgonians Ironbreakers. That said, as you can see, the cannon racked up massive amounts of damage. The Rangers did very, very well. The Rune Lord actually did really well, just melting troops down and then holding his own in close quarters. And all in all, this was definitely, I think, a rather solid build if you're worried about dealing with Beastmen. Beastmen don't have very much they can really, I think, they definitely, well, they have quite a bit that they could potentially do to cover it, but because of the prevalence of the Cygor meta, that's really kind of just, right now the Cygor meta is just really, really dominant in the, against Dwarves. So there's a very good chance that in every fight you're going to fight at least one Cygor, quite possibly 2 Cygors, or perhaps Malagor with summoning additional Cygors, something like that. In those situations, this kind of build can be incredibly potent, because you get right on top of your opponent, you can immediately start firing on them with Rangers. Chances are their front line is going to be fairly weak. You can definitely deal with them pretty effectively. And if your opponent has a cheaper front line, like say Gors or Ungors or units like that, they're going to have a very, very hard time cracking this front line of miners. In spite of everything, the miners are obviously not ideal in melee, but they are reasonable. And backed by Rangers, they can definitely still trade pretty effectively with say Gors or Ungors or a cheap front line, which is not particularly likely against Dwarves. Against Dwarves, you're likely to see bestigors. So definitely, I think it's a decent build. It's definitely a pretty fun build. And obviously, there's much I can improve, but I definitely think it's really solid. So I do, for my opponent's build, I definitely think this is kind of the standard meta build. As far as gameplay goes, obviously, probably deploying the Cygors for the back would have been good. Especially, it's important, I think, to check. If you see that your opponent has a very high model count in their army, deploy further back as against Dwarves. Obviously, there are very wide builds you could do with Dwarf Warriors and Quarrelers. I'm not going to argue that those don't exist. There are some very wide builds like that, and I've seen and played against some of those. So there's definitely a possibility, but generally, if you see your opponent has a massive model count, there's a good chance it's a Vanguard build. And Dwarf Age Vanguard builds are not something to be underestimated. Had my opponent had a little more breathing room with his Minotaurs and his Cygors and all that sort of stuff, definitely had a much rougher time getting into position still, and really kind of applying that early game pressure. Nonetheless, I do hope you guys enjoyed the video. If you did, be sure to leave a like and subscribe down below. If any comments, criticism, any questions about the game or anything like that, be sure to post them in the comments, and I will respond as soon as I can. As usual, guys, I do appreciate you all for watching, and I will see you all in the next one. Bye for now.